So it's kind of a bitch writing a review for a game that isn't even fully out yet. It's only a third of the way out, technically, so in some respects that makes parts of my critique feel unfair, because perhaps they just haven't had time to justify themselves. For example, if I criticized Warren's voice acting in episode 1 when no subsequent episodes had been released, I wouldn't have a lot of ground to stand on by episode 4 when that character's voice is fully fleshed out and toned down. I felt more equipped to speak to the 5 episodes that make up the original Life is Strange because I had the opportunity to see how all of these pieces fit together in a single fluid game. And I got to experience the game as it was being released bit by bit. I also have about 65 hours logged into the game, so I've had the chance to fully explore what the game has to offer. For those that did want to hear my thoughts on the game, I'll go over the gameplay mechanics, initial feelings, and predictions about the direction the game is heading in, but all of these things are subject to change upon the release of other episodes. You never know when a future episode could place a nice band-aid over previous failures, or what shortcomings might have been intentional. Punk Club. This scene begins with an elongated cutscene of Chloe hopping off of some train tracks, lighting a cigarette, and hilariously flipping off a thigh-high fence that she somehow managed to jump over. All of these things to remind us that Chloe is a badass punk. Something that going to an abandoned sawmill to see a punk show would have shown us anyway, but hey, why not? We then approach the building where a gruff-looking bouncer can easily be persuaded into letting a miner in if they're sassy enough. 2 dudes fighting over a bet, Frank's RV, and a dog kennel. It's pretty obvious from the scene here that we're getting hints of how Frank met Pompidou, which I hope they don't really expand on. I mean, like, do we really need Pompidou's origins? Frank already got redeemed in the first game, in multiple instances, in fact. I guess it could be interesting, but I feel like we already got the bullet points of this story. Despite initially thinking that it was going to be dumb, I did actually enjoy the backtalk feature that gets introduced. It's a mimicry puzzle, where you have to kind of reflect what people are saying. It's pitched as a risk-reward system, which is not always the case. For example, if you fail this segment, which it's a tutorial so you would have to do it on purpose, you can just sneak into the show by moving a dog kennel. So it's not that it affects what happens, but how something happens, and if you fail, you just get the thing in another way. Good. The puzzles do suffer from lack of communication from the game, though. I'm not always positive what these dialogue prompts mean or what tone they're going to be spoken in, so it feels a little unjust when I pick one and it ends up being something different than what I thought it was going to be. The failure in the puzzle should be due to my failure, not the game's in explaining what resource is at my disposal. One way or another you make it inside the venue where there is a cooler of free beer despite a guy clearly working the bar, and you have the opportunity to wreck someone's car to steal a $20 band tee and the cash that he's made that night. Chloe not understanding how much things cost. All of this is optional, therefore not story-centric as we learned from the last game. You bump into a gross-looking dude and spill his beer. You can talk to Frank where he mentions that he works with the gross dude, and you also have the option to pay Frank back. If you took the money, you have no real reason to do this, again because it's an optional prompt. Some crazy how nobody is in the loft that Chloe climbs up to and she jams out to the show on her lonesome. The skeevy guys who had no real reason to follow you up there start trouble, like as if now they're not in public and they can harass Chloe in private. I think there's potentially implied bodily harm or sexual abuse that they're threatening, but it's not exactly made clear, so I feel like the tension of the scene is dissolved a little bit by that. See, the original game did a good job of letting you know what was at stake right away. In your first 10 minutes, a girl gets shot in the stomach. That let the audience know, hey, this is the kind of shit you're gonna see. This is what we are willing to put you through. Before the Storm exists in the same universe, but it hasn't given us that reference point yet, so maybe the violence in this game is going to be a little more on the side of T for teen instead of M for mature to let it appeal to a wider audience. We don't know. Anyway, Rachel, like the Mary Sue that she is, busts in long enough to distract the skeevy dudes so you can either attack them or run away. The effects of this choice don't weigh too heavily in this episode. If you attack, then Chloe gets a black eye and tells her mom later that she walked into something, and then Rachel can cover it up with makeup not long after. If you run, not much appears to change. Frank also protects you from the 2 skeevy dudes, which I guess he was fine with letting them up there with Chloe alone since he appeared to have been guarding that stairwell. Rachel and Chloe run into the now for some reason accessible mosh pit and have a good night. Chloe's house. I hate this scene. Nothing works in this scene. I don't want to say any of the things that Chloe has to say, and I don't even necessarily want her to disagree with David even if he is being a bit of a dick. To me, this is an issue with playing characters that have already been really well defined. Max started off as a mainly blank slate, so you could kind of take her in whichever direction you wanted to. You could be snarky and a little mean with her, or you could be innocent. With nearly every dialogue prompt that's offered to Chloe, I am compromising on, well, I guess this sounds like the least hurtful bit of dialogue. Chloe also just complains so much about every goddamn thing in her home life, and without it really being earned. With Chloe, I have to fight actual reservations that I, the player, have. This works against empathizing with the protagonist. You shouldn't ever be in a position where you hate the character that you're playing. This attitude can be earned in two ways. 1. Make us hate that we like Chloe, in the style of traditional anti-heroes where they do morally dubious things but we learn to be okay with it. Dr. House, Dr. Cox, Deadpool, Tyrion Lannister, etc. Or 2. Harm the moral integrity of the parental figures who are attempting to help Chloe. Remember in episode 1 where we already had a run-in with David, and how in some situations he actually hit Chloe? And how we went through his stuff and learned that he's spying on his home and on Blackwell? That's one way to do it, but David hasn't done any of this yet, so he doesn't earn the abuse that he's getting. She's not playing the part of the anti-hero here. She hasn't done anything charming or remarkable enough to earn being a bitch to people that are clearly trying to help. And Joyce and David are pretty objectively in the right here. Chloe's not justified in her responses or given any real reason to act the way she is, not anything that's been given to us in-game. This scene might have worked somewhere else chronologically, but not as the second scene and otherwise introductory scene to Joyce and David. Dream. It is refreshing to see that Life is Strange learned how to do a dream sequence. It was made short, added mystique, and acted as a swell transition from David's car to school. I like how it implemented props from the game into the dream. My only complaint with those is that I wish they were interchangeable depending on certain choices. It would be nice to have that level of interactivity within the dream. Maybe there's a way to do it, but I haven't found it if there is. As with the nightmare of a nightmare sequence in the first game, opening the journal allows you to view an idealized journal entry where Max is writing to you, confessing that all of her letters to you got lost in the mail, and that she's moving back to Arcadia Bay. Things will be as they were. You also have texts from Joyce and Max offering revisionist events of the day William died. The scene works because of its placement. I wasn't exactly burning to go back to Blackwell, and it's a nice contrast with David, who we spent the majority of the last scene with. Blackwell. You're dropped off by David in the Blackwell Courtyard, where you can talk to all of your favorite characters from the original game. Like Justin and Evan. I think we spoke to Evan like once in the last game. I mean, it makes sense that he'd be here, but I guess I just saw him and I had the, oh, him, reaction. We meet Chloe's equivalent to Warren, Elliot. Upon reading Chloe's journal, you can find out that they hooked up a few times after William died. Is this the bad boy phase that Joyce mentioned? Probably not. Nothing is done to develop him other than to potentially make Chloe walk down some shallow heterosexual relationship. Like I said, Chloe's Warren. You can also talk to Victoria, who won some contest for photography and she clearly wants praise for, but she doesn't want to admit that she wants praise. All this really tells us is that her insecurities started pretty early. She also fishes for some information about Rachel Amber, which I imagine will lead to something or other later. This scene also had my favorite interaction in the game. Yes, the oft-criticized D&D segment. I don't know why so many people disliked this. Every time I streamed the game, people asked me to skip it, but this is the most fun I had with the game. It added a fresh take to the game by giving you something actually enjoyable to do. I really want to see one of these in every episode, seriously. I also get intrigued for the first time by an interesting new character, Samantha Myers, who seems to have some fondness for Nathan. What's strange about her is that she isn't around later. Like, what happens to this chick? She feels a bit like Nathan's Max, you know, excusing monstrous personality traits due to a tragic family background. The thing about Samantha that is actually interesting, though, is that we get a very Max Caulfield vibe from her, but she likes Nathan. Like, there's clearly some history being hinted at here, some mystique. This is really the only thing in the game that has made me raise an eyebrow. Lastly, to conclude the scene, there is some superficial fight between Nathan Prescott and Drew North, older brother to the nerdy kid you can play D&D with. You can either initiate a yo mama fight with him in order to get him to lay off Nathan, or do the Chloe thing and mind your own business. Either way, Victoria gets mad at you, even though after the fact she can be standing like right fucking there in some cases, and could have easily participated or intervened, and Nathan walks away in a huff. Now, I know I said I liked this scene. What I meant was that I liked playing it. There are some decent interactions here, but what bugs me is how easy it is for Chloe to befriend people in this circumstance. You can throw a bone to the nerdy kids and sit through a D&D adventure. You can be nice to Nathan. You seem well liked by Samantha. Throughout all of these interactions, everybody kind of likes Chloe, which is juxtaposed to the narrative we're handed about her being a loner. Chloe didn't even know who was going to be in this courtyard, and there's the option to, if not temporarily, which maybe it is temporary since this is just the first game, you can make pretty much anyone like you. They do this because Deck 9 seems to understand, some of the time, mind you, they understand that it's not actually fun to play the loner. The character would not actually be fun to experience. In a game where your sole mechanic is to interact with people, the inability to interact with people in an engaging manner would fall flat on its face. But they make the world more open and inviting to Chloe in contrast of her narrative. That's the problem with Before the Storm, that's the catch-22. To make the game enjoyable with Life is Strange's mechanics is to disservice Chloe's character. To be true to Chloe's character is to make the game solitary and unenjoyable. Back into the narrative, after you finish up the courtyard, you are greeted by Rachel at the door of the school and brought to the drama classroom where Hayden and Dana are seen rehearsing for the Tempest. You have an option here to not so subtly flirt with Rachel and tell her you believe in a thing called love, and you can explore the room for a bit, find a picture of Rachel and her father, and then Rachel will offer to ditch school with Chloe. What I did like about the drama classroom, and even the drama element of the game, is that it highlights the idea that Blackwell is a school for more than just photography. The entire school seemed to focus on photography in the original game, and it's kind of cool to see that that was just the lens of the character we were viewing things in. It's not actually a photography school, or a photography-centric world, that's just how Max saw it. Train. The train scene to me was a callback to Chloe rescuing Max from Nathan in the first game. It's where you, the protagonist, start to get to know your partner in crime for the rest of the game. The graffiti and moving landscapes and texture of conversation all feel exactly like this scene, but to me there was an issue here with pacing. See, in the original game, the previous scene was pretty tense. We had recently seen Nathan shoot Chloe and then both threaten you and start a fight with Warren. There was a real feeling of danger there. The scene with Chloe was needed to calm things down as well as introduce the player to Chloe. Tension rose and then fell. In Before the Storm, though, there was no tension before this scene, which makes the game feel very slow-moving. The only tension in Before the Storm up to this point had been a very quick cutscene that we didn't really have much agency or context with, nor was there much development in it. As I mentioned earlier, I wasn't positive what was being threatened or why, and the answer can't be as simple as, if that's what the main conflict of this game hinges on, I might be personally insulted. Imagine Life is Strange's core conflict being spilling Frank's beans. Other than that, the scene worked fine for its purpose in the plot. Rachel actually needed to be built up as someone you could talk to and get to know. Unlike Chloe in the first game, however, she's impossible to piss off, which kind of frustrated me. You know how Chloe would do shitty things in Life is Strange, like attempt to blame you for her weed, and then get mad if you didn't take the fall? Then she would even still take an attitude with you later? You can literally make a reference to having sex with Rachel despite having just met her, and she just kinda laughs it off. It's not necessarily a bad thing if that's the intended relationship, but she doesn't ever throw that back at you if she's interested. You can also cheat in 2 truths and a lie, and all she really does is point out that you cheated. Rachel doesn't feel like someone in this game that can ever really be moved or swayed. She just feels like she's something that is on its own set path. Which, yes, I understand this is a prequel, she is technically on her own set path, but the problem with this lies in the game being an interactive experience that to this point doesn't feel very interactive. It doesn't feel very alive. Overlook. The Overlook scene worked. It didn't feel out of place, and it was a slight increase in pacing. The fix-it puzzle on the viewfinder wasn't all that bad either. Although I wish there was more than one way to fix it, it gives you time to explore and you are potentially rewarded for the soon-to-come backtalk sequence for talking to the couple prematurely. After the puzzle, you and Rachel get to watch and make fun of visitors of the park. It felt like a huge joke dump for the writers. I think they thought they needed to be funny in a game where often the writer's perception of the youth alone offers enough comedic relief for the player. I couldn't force myself to laugh at the majority of these jokes. There were one or two that made me crack a smile. I don't think that this hurts the game, if not for the fact that you have to look at so many of these people before you arrive at the cutscene that you were intended to arrive at. In this scene, exactly what I described in my theory video before the game came out happens. Me doing a celebratory victory dance, unfortunately, was not a DLC offered by the game though, so it harms this scene just a little bit in my opinion. Rachel then wants to go and steal a booze, so she faints in front of some picnic goers, and rather than calling the police like sane people, they try to force a teenager whom they previously regarded as homeless to go get help. Chloe either fucks up the backtalk challenge and steals the wine in plain sight, or succeeds and steals the wine in plain sight. Again, this doesn't exactly cater to the advertised risk-reward feature, because no matter what, you get the wine. Instead of maybe disappointing Rachel and not getting her the alcohol she wants, like, was the existence of alcohol really necessary? Junkyard. The Junkyard was what I had the highest hopes for, to be honest. In the trailer, we were given a really good delivery by Chloe showcasing some plot-related emotion, and the friendship option I thought showed a lot of understanding about Chloe's character. The issue I have with this scene, though, is that all of the drama is self-contained in this episode. It's kind of like the 5-second foreshadowing trope. It wouldn't be that big of a problem, but everything just gets resolved neatly and almost immediately by the end of the episode. No matter what option you choose, Rachel gets pissed off, and she walks away in a huff to process her emotions. Which, by the way, I've seen like a lot of people judge her for, which I don't feel is entirely fair. Like, yeah guys, sometimes like people get depressed and want to take some time to themselves to be depressed. Like, have you ever been sad before? After Rachel left and Chloe picked up the bat, I was kind of excited. I thought, oh, finally, a chance for the player to empathize with Chloe's frustration. The mechanics for this section, however, feel terrible. I know this game isn't exactly known for its active mechanics, but I guess I thought that in a scene that is trying to make you feel an emotion like anger, the response time would be a little quicker. I thought having every option on the WASD mapping be smash was a really good touch, and I thought I was going to get the opportunity to experience Chloe's blind rage. But not only are the blows she deals to her targets like really weak feeling and disconnected by the length of the cutscenes, the monologues she delivers on a few of them detract from the feeling that this is true rage. See, when real human people are mad, they don't deliver premeditated monologues in symmetry with what they are doing. They'll yell, their voices will break, and they don't sound like they're just having a little whimpering fit. Further distracting is the text that you get from Joyce about Chloe having skipped school. Why am I being asked to slow down when I'm trying to have a fit of rage? To give you a good idea of what I mean, I've edited this scene and cut out unnecessary bits and added some sound effects to make it sound more like destructive behavior is happening.
Fuck this place. Fuck off, Rachel. Fuck you, David. Fuck cameras.
The action that comes closest to what I felt would have assisted in empathy the most is when Chloe sees William's car. Her jaw drops, and then she begins slamming her fists on the hood of the car. It felt disconnected due to the amount of time between pressing the smash button and Chloe actually smashing the car, but it's leagues better than the previous rage section. Dream 2. The dream sequence, I think, is slightly worse than the last one, mostly because I feel at this point that it might be too cryptic for its own good. If some foreshadowing is being hinted at, I would say that it's far too coded in its own language to be dissected at this point, and that it'll make sense sooner. Also, please reference the disclaimer at the beginning of this video. I'm not saying it's the worst dream sequence ever, and definitely not the worst one that Life is Strange has made, but just that now I don't have the tools to make sense of too much. The only thing I can kind of make sense of is the warning about the raven in the park and how it relates to the dream. that the Raven's a trickster to be respected and not trusted, and the fact that the Raven appears in the dream, you know, the grinning face could easily be attributed to William, who I always kind of pictured smiling with every line delivery. You know, he's always chuckling and laughing and all that good stuff. These dreams appear to be leading Chloe down a path of something's making or something's preference, but it doesn't appear to be doing so necessarily for Chloe's sake. No matter where it's leading her, we're supposed to feel some tension for Chloe because she is trusting the Raven. Otherwise, the scene acts as a plot device to direct Chloe to where Rachel Amber is. Epilogue. Chloe wakes up in the junkyard, presumably free of hepatitis, and goes to the tree in the park where Rachel is staring wistfully. We learn that Rachel's dad was in a public park committing adultery. This is a public service announcement. I was right. Thanks and have a nice day. Chloe and Rachel discuss some plans to leave Arcadia Bay penniless and without any real resources, but I mean, that's what teenagers do. And then Rachel, in complete disregard for forest fire safety, starts a fire in a garbage can and kicks the fire into the oak tree, lighting the forest ablaze. Rachel then screams at the flames, and the wind appears to blow dramatically behind her. A large population of the player base has interpreted these as powers, to which I heartily disagree. The developers have said already that the game does not have superpowered teenagers. So, for your theory about Rachel having powers to be correct, that would imply that the developers are lying, which is something that is possible, but not probable. Also, that animation for the wind happens literally everywhere. Like, I don't see theories floating around that Rachel is controlling the wind every time it blows. Look over there! Rachel's controlling the wind? How do I know? Cause look, it's wind. A neat little footnote is that Chloe has Anja written on her hand, which I believe means anxiety. I also apologize for my pronunciation. I don't know if this serves as the root culture that we're supposed to be interpreting these symbols in, or maybe just describing Chloe's current state of mind. In conversations with Elliot, it is mentioned that Chloe speaks Spanish reasonably well, and has taken a Spanish course, so, I mean, maybe? It's a bit of a stretch, but it's the only conclusion I can land on right now. Closing thoughts. Again, I'm going to compare this to episode 1 of the original game, which some people may argue is not really fair, but I kinda don't care. You have to go into this with the understanding that you need to measure up in some way to your predecessor. At the end of Life is Strange Episode 1, I had burning questions. Why does Max have these powers? How will they keep this interesting going further? What happened to Rachel Amber? What is going on with this snow, and the incoming storm? When am I going to run into Nathan next, and how will I protect myself? What is David Madsen doing? Whose side is he on? At the end of Before the Storm, what am I wondering? What is at stake? Nothing of substance was really brought up that is unresolved. Like, honestly, I feel that could have been the last episode of Before the Storm that I played, and it would have made sense as an ending. I don't feel as though they set up a second episode in terms of expectations. Chloe didn't seem to react too much to Rachel's screams, so I guess I have to assume in-universe that they were otherwise inconsequential. Maybe I'm wondering what people will say about the fire. I mean, not particularly, if I'm honest. Oh, Chloe's going to the principal. So I don't know, I guess that will happen. That's not a question. And that's not even something that I'm interested to see play out. I know she gets kicked out of Blackwell, so maybe that's when it's gonna happen, but how will Chloe and Rachel run away, maybe? Was that something that they were actually talking about doing, or was that just a general, like, yeah, someday we should do that talk? I really don't know. If it is, then why didn't Before the Storm just kind of start around there? Did we need an entire episode to explain why Rachel wanted to run away? Do you see the problem I'm trying to get at here? Nothing is asking me to play a second episode of Before the Storm. Even that aside, Life is Strange had a lot going on in the background as well. Dana had an abortion recently, Kate had some shit going on if you looked into some finer details, Miss Grant had her petition, the world felt very alive. Everybody seemed to have their own agenda and their own stuff going on, and it wasn't just taking place in one courtyard. Before the Storm does a little better in this department. Like I said, Samantha Myers is interesting, and maybe Drew North? Like, maybe? He seems to exposition his entire attitude toward Nathan at the beginning of that fight, but conceivably there's something else. Skip has his dope mixtape, and D&D Girl has her bootleg DVD business and her crush on Rachel, but none of these things exist outside the courtyard setting. It's just like, this is the place you go to have separate interactions. Is that what this is going to be? Like a Chow Garden where you go and see how all of your Tamagotchis are doing? Another issue I have, and this is a somewhat minor one, it's with the Rachel Amber worship. And surprisingly, I'm not talking about the fans, I'm talking about with Chloe. Remember when she says,
"Alright, Chloe, you're on a freaking train with Rachel freaking Amber. Play it cool."
And she sounds like she's this dreamy, love-struck, like Rachel's this goddess. See, when I saw the trailer, I got the idea from the fit that Chloe throws towards the end that Chloe had this interpretation of Rachel, that she was stuck up and preppy. And then maybe after some time she felt like, oh, she's not so bad, I kind of like her. But then after it seemed like Rachel was cold shouldering and betraying that perception, that Chloe felt kind of hurt by that. That seems more like a reasonable representation of outcast kids interpreting the popular kids to me. I should know, I was one. I can tell you that I sure as fuck didn't hold those people up on a pedestal. Even if I ended up becoming friends with some of them in my later years, that's not how archetypes interact with each other. Kids fitting the outcast descriptor aren't necessarily fawning to climb the social hierarchy. My issue with this isn't that my idea of how they're representing high school hierarchy is wrong per se. My issue is that they're kind of implying that Chloe cares about that. Chloe's character begs for the attitude of being beyond these sorts of things. Perhaps Rachel did something to change her mind at the really fun show that they went to that we didn't really get to see any of. A night that made Rachel and Chloe want to be best friends forever, that we didn't get to experience. So we don't really get that empathy. It sounds like the best part of Before the Storm and the part that everybody was most interested in got faded to black and skipped over. Remember how Chloe was kind of shitty to Max at the beginning of Life is Strange, still kind of hurt from feeling like Max abandoned her? And then eventually, after they get each other out of a couple of scrapes, you start getting more and more of an idea that Chloe is Max's best friend, even if you didn't like Chloe necessarily? We're not exactly getting any of that. I don't feel like it's an issue with time constraints, the Life is Strange having 5 episodes and Before the Storm having 3. I mean, Chloe could still be shitty to you by the end of the first episode of Life is Strange. So far, I just feel like it's a failure in player expression. Above all else, the worst thing that Before the Storm does is that it misunderstands Chloe Price. I kept seeing in press releases that developers wanted to tell the story of how Chloe became Chloe. So imagine my surprise when in the trailer she acts like the exact same person as she was in Life is Strange. What narrative are we getting about Chloe's growth and development? Was it the story of how Chloe learned to let exactly one person in? Well, we already sort of saw that in the original game when she accepts Max back into her life as a close friend, at the very least. Was it how Chloe grew her attitude and learned to be an independent punk? Well, no, it's not, because Chloe is already that in Before the Storm. So all in all, Before the Storm has given us a main character who doesn't promise to change or grow in any meaningful way, since Chloe has to act the way she's acting right up until the first episode of Life is Strange. Instead, it promises interacting with another character who doesn't seem to be able to be influenced by the main mechanics of the game, choices made by Chloe, and she's going through something that roughly 50% of American adolescents go through, and some vague mysticism that isn't able to be interacted with at this time. The game doesn't define its mysteries enough so far to ask players to solve them, and the world doesn't offer enough mystique to be explored. I really hope that I'm wrong and that the next episode gives us something more to go on that allows episode 1 to be explored in a different light, but at this moment my feelings are that Before the Storm doesn't understand Chloe Price, and it doesn't understand Life is Strange.